Hello, my name is Robert Baines. I am the President and CEO of the NATO Association of Canada, a charity dedicated to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. This is not something that most Canadians have to ever talk about, but it's something that we constantly drive home to Canadians, just how much our peace and everyday life is dependent on some very impressive work by many Canadians and many allies from the different 30 NATO nations working together constantly to maintain our peace and security. To do that today, we're talking about sports and specifically the connection between defense and sports. It's a very long-standing connection that we'll be able to dig into very deeply today with some outstanding panelists. So we're going to go one by one with our panelists. I'm going to introduce them all and then ask each individually 2 questions. And hopefully after that, we'll be able to get into a bit more of a discussion voted on by you who are watching on YouTube. You can write a few questions in the text box at the side of your screen. If you have any questions to ask the panelists, we'll get them dealt with as quickly as possible. We do have an hour for this event, and please make sure that your questions are relevant and very brief, and we'll be able to get to them. So with that, I would like to start off just by recognizing that this is, of course, November the 10th, the day before Remembrance Day, and the whole role of NATO, its desire for peace and security and prosperity, was born out of the nightmare death and destruction of the Second World War and the lessons we learned from that conflict. It is a constant monument to those who have served, and it is something that every Canadian should be proud of. I certainly am, and I know that all of those who are on the panel today will be able to attest to that as well. So, to start off, I would like to talk first with Lieutenant Colonel retired Ed Staniowski. Ed joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1985 after a 10-year professional hockey career as a goalie with the St. Louis Blues, Winnipeg Jets, and Hartford Whalers, where he played over 400 games. During his NHL career, he was selected to play for Team Canada and was awarded the Charlie Conacher Humanitarian Award. With the Canadian Army, Colonel Staniowski served on multiple operational deployments, including the UN and NATO missions. He's been an active participant in military sports throughout his career, including coaching 2 Canadian Armed Forces regional champion women's hockey teams, coaching the Canadian Armed Forces Soldier On team at the 2014 NHL Outdoor Classic, and the 2018 Memorial Cup Heritage Classic. In 2019, Colonel Staniowski trained and coached the Canadian Armed Forces shooting team at the NATO military shooting competition. There is actually quite a bit more, and Colonel, I'm sure you can dig into some of those if they're relevant to what we're discussing today. But I wanted to start off with just asking if you can tell us a little about your history, coming as you do from the NHL. And why did you decide to leave professional hockey to join the Canadian Armed Forces? It's not a common transition, I wouldn't think.
Well, Robert, great to be part of the panel today. I think going directly to the question, it ties to what you described earlier about the reason for NATO, believe it or not. My father was on the Polish front September 1st, 1939 as a Polish soldier when Poland was invaded. And he fought through the Second World War from 39 right to 45. He was fortunate to get out of Poland and ended up fighting in North Africa and Italy with the British 8th Army. My mother was a nurse in the Second World War, trauma nurse. So on a very, very personal level, I was brought up in a home that very much appreciated the horrors of war and the challenges to a Europe that was torn apart by the Second World War. Both my brothers served in the Canadian Armed Forces, and so to anyone who knew our family or knows our family, it would be no surprise that I would personally someday get involved with the military in some fashion, and that happened for me after 4 years of junior hockey, major junior hockey, and 10 years of professional hockey in the NHL. So it certainly doesn't surprise too many people that knows our family. For me, I would have probably joined the military as a 19, 20-year-old had I not been drafted by the St. Louis Blues. I'm one of the few people that can say I couldn't join the Army because I got drafted. I was very, very fortunate to play those 10 years in the NHL and those 4 years of junior. And what that taught me on a personal level is the importance of sports and character building. The things you learn about teamwork, the things you learn about yourself, working through friction. You don't play hockey at the professional level or any of the sports that are represented here, I would suggest, or that the Canadian Armed Forces have, unless you have the personal character to be dedicated and work through the challenges and the friction. And we all know as serving member or former serving members that your career is going to entail friction, and you have to learn to work through that. Could be injuries, could be stress, could be personalities, leadership that needs to take you beyond what you're normal to. So all those things to me, when I was playing hockey, I think helped set me up for if I did have any success in the military, but certainly enabled me to survive a 29-year career, multiple operational tours, with some tremendous friends, brotherhood and sisterhood that I cherish. And as you mentioned also, to see it at the national and international level with our coalition partners and our alliances such as NATO, which is extremely important. And again, that runs all through my family history, and it runs through certainly my career. And when I was playing hockey in the NHL with Team Canada, we played in Moscow, we played in Sweden and Finland. There are just so many parallels, on a personal level, so many parallels that I saw in hockey that resonate with me.
Terrific, Colonel. I'm just curious about what are some of the things that you thought that the Canadian Armed Forces could learn from your experience in the NHL? Is there anything that you brought that seemed to be quite unique and helpful that you were able to transmit?
Well, I already alluded to the things on the personal level for myself, but develop that into what teamwork is all about. Again, you don't take a ship through the North Atlantic without teamwork. You don't deploy a squadron of aircraft for the big exercises in Europe, with NATO and things like that, without tremendous teamwork. You certainly don't go into Afghanistan and the Balkans with a battle group unless it's been focused, trained, worked up, the morale, all those things that you must have to be successful as an individual and as a group. I know certainly the General and Colonel Harding and Major Frayco will all speak to those things too. Very, very, very important. And I can assure you, you don't go into Philadelphia and play the Philadelphia Flyers and into Boston and play the Bruins or the Canadians, or, well, you might have a little more luck with Toronto these days, but anyways, well, that's a sidebar. But you don't have those unless you have all of that same structure and discipline and focus and training. All those things is my experience with regard to that. The other thing I would mention is sports. Sooner or later, at a professional level or a very, very competitive level, there's a transition from that. It ends. You can't play professional hockey forever. For me, it was due to some injuries, due to some personal decisions. Military life is the same thing. You transition out of the military, maybe due to an injury. Jay will speak to that, I'm sure, a great deal. Major Frayco, you don't. Those transitions come with their own stresses and challenges and things, and it goes full circle. It certainly did for me. After your career, whether you left for personal reasons or whether you left for an injury or whatever the case might be, you find that you might find an opportunity to get back into it with sports. And again, I'm sure Major Frayco will speak a whole lot to that. And whether it's Soldier On or Wounded Warrior or any of the other groups or things, tremendous opportunities there. The Invictus Games, which again ties the alliance and the coalitions and international partnership into sports, and we go full circle.
Great description, and thanks so much for starting us off, Colonel. I must say, when we were able to connect the NHL to the Canadian Armed Forces, it's one of those wonderful combinations that, as you were mentioning before we started the live conversation, if we can just bring Tim Hortons in there, we've got kind of a great trifecta there of Canadianism. So thanks so much for that. There we are. I would like to next bring into the conversation Lieutenant Colonel Charlene Harding. Colonel Harding joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1988. She's served at various locations across Canada, tactical, operational, strategic, and joint levels in the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and in support of the Canadian Army. She's currently serving at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, or SHAPE, as the Canadian Deputy National Military Representative to SHAPE, and as the commanding officer of the Formation Europe Canadians in Casteau, Southwest Europe. Colonel Harding's also an avid sports fan, not surprising, especially soccer and basketball, and is the head coach for the Canadian Armed Forces Women's CISM basketball team, and an assistant coach for the SHAPE Men's International Basketball team. Colonel Harding, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I'd just like to put two questions to you to start the conversation. Specifically, you've obviously been in many different positions, and now being overseas, you're coming up to a lot of different connections and allied situations. How has sports impacted your own experience as a servicewoman posted overseas?
Well, yeah. So first, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me here. This is quite the opportunity. And just to carry on from what was said before, the fact of playing high-level competitive sports, whether it's CISM or university or, NHL, like little things like that, whatever it may be, it does prepare you for an overseas posting. The resiliency that you build from being an athlete. It comes in handy whether you're deployed or whether you're working at an international headquarters. You have to deal with some very adverse, trying, challenging situations from time to time. And it prepares you to deal with those things. For those of you who grew up playing sports in the 80s and 90s, where, it was challenging, you were pushed beyond your limits, yelling and screaming and all those other kind of things that is frowned upon nowadays, but it does prepare you for dealing with the other challenges as being a military service person. I've deployed a few times, and even deployed overseas. I find that sports really brings people together because it gives you something else to do. It gets your stress out, it gets your competition going, it's a free way and to get the aggression out without actually offending or being offensive. It also gives you a great network. You meet a lot of people, you make a lot of friends. You make a lot of friends that you wouldn't normally be friends with or you wouldn't normally hang out with, but because you have that common goal of being, wanting to win that game or whatever the competition may be, you spend a lot of time building those relationships, and they last forever. Like I can come across people from either the CAF or from other militaries that I've met along the way at World Games or championships in the middle of nowhere. And you just spark up a conversation because of that one tournament or that one competition where you were adversaries or teammates. So I find that sports for me is it's brought a lot of that sort of resilience, and it's also given me a lifelong commitment to fitness. So overseas, especially now during COVID, when it's really challenging, it's allowed me to be able to continue to train and to continue to motivate others to train. As a head coach of a team where you can't actually get into a gym, it can be very challenging. And so right now it's all that sort of pre-training that I've had in the past is coming forward now, which is invaluable.
Sure. I love that you picked out resilience. Of course, that has been the word of the, half decade. It's been becoming more and more important, and suddenly under COVID, it's become all important, perhaps. For those who are watching our conversation, I think it's so interesting that everybody has some experience with sports, and they just don't necessarily realize how much it impacts the military aspect, and also the kind of the diplomatic aspect of military relations. And I'd love it if you have any stories of how sports have positively impacted the community and helped create cooperation and collaboration, because in NATO, that is all important. How do we get 30 countries actually work elbow to elbow every day?
Yeah, no, it's true. One of the benefits of being part of the coaching staff here at the SHAPE International team is that we actually, against other CISM basketball teams, so men's teams, but we're an international team. So you have members on the team who are from Greece, who are from the States, who are from, Belgium, they're from all over the place, Italy, and we're all brought together as the international team, playing high level competition. Some of these guys are Olympians. And so it really brings us all together to forget about the work side of things and some of the contentious side of things, and to play as teammates, to get along as teammates. And the families are involved, the spouses are there, the kids are cheering for you. And so you get to know more of the family, more of the community, and it brings the community together. So now when I walk down the hallways of SHAPE, I will see some random Italian general or some random, American corporal or tech sergeant or staff sergeant. And I literally was sweating on the court with them. So I know them very well. So it does help in that respect. I've done it before a few other places, but deployed overseas when I was working in Haiti. I got together a soccer team for the headquarters staff, because we had headquarters staff who, if anyone in the military knows that nobody likes anyone at headquarters staff. And we would play against the battalions and the companies so that they could see that we're actually human beings. And you can get all your, and then you can shoot the breeze, and afterwards you have your pop or your juice or whatever it is, and you chat. And so it kind of brings everyone together. So it's not just us, them, or it's us versus them, but it's in a different sort of environment where it's a little bit more fun and there's less paperwork, less stuff. Togetherness and the whole benefit of being an athlete and being in the military.
Yeah, I think that is such an important aspect to underline. We at the NATO Association, we're constantly trying to emphasize how much the collaboration actually impacts our relationship with each country. And when we talk about the diplomatic work that goes on at NATO headquarters, it is amplified around the alliance at a whole bunch of different operations. Of course, we've got our enhanced forward presence in Latvia, where we're working with so many allies, the NATO mission in Iraq. We Canadians have forged this with the rest of NATO, marching forward together. And a lot of that has been assisted by the work on the court, as it were. So I think that that's just such a fun extra bit of detail, that these diplomatic connections go far beyond just the simple regular handshake or quarterly meeting of ministers of defense. Like that. Thanks so much, Colonel. I'd now like to ask Major Jay Frayco a few questions. And the Major is retired now, National Manager of Soldier On, a Canadian Armed Forces program which contributes to the recovery of ill and injured serving members and veterans by providing opportunities and resources through sport, recreational, and creative activities. Jay initially came to Soldier On as a serving regular Force Major and continues to lead the program after medically transitioning out of uniform in 2016 after 22 years of service. Jay's overseen Soldiers On expansion from coast to coast, tremendous job, and support over 6,500 ill or injured members, including successful participation in high-profile events such as the Soldier On Afghanistan Relay, South Pole Expedition with Prince Harry, and Team Canada participation at all Invictus and Warrior Games. In 2016, the Governor-General awarded Jay the Meritorious Service Medal for his continuous work with Soldier On and support to the ill and injured community. Other honors and awards include a Sacrifice Medal, Canadian Army Command Commendation for leading a rare gold-winning team at the UK Cambrian Patrol Competition, which is brutal from all accounts, and the Lieutenant General Vance Sword Award for outstanding leadership within the Royal Canadian Regiment. So, Jay, you've obviously, you don't like sports at all. I don't know why you're on this panel whatsoever, but I'd love it if you could kind of dig into Soldier On a little bit more and explain it, why it chooses to focus on sport as a tool for rehabilitation. What is it about sports that makes it such a great tool?
Yeah, thank you, Robert, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. I'm excited to discuss Soldier On here today. Sport as a rehabilitation tool in the military is not a new development. It dates back to World War II, just around the time when NATO stood up. Dr. Gutmann, who was a Jewish neurosurgeon who fled Nazi-occupied Germany just before the war, he went to the UK, and in 1943 he was asked to establish National Spinal Injuries Center in Stoke Mandeville. He believed that sport was a major therapy for injured members to build self-esteem and help in their recovery. He had a vision during this time to bring militaries together, injured military members together to play sport. And in 1952, the Stoke Mandeville Games in the UK became an international competition, and the Dutch war veterans came in and competed. And then just shortly after that, 12 years later, the complete vision was realized as those games turned into the Paralympic Games, which a lot of people think are the paraplegic games. They're not, but they're a parallel games to the Olympics. And today are the second biggest sporting event in the world to its sister, the Olympics. So in a response to the high number of wounded coming back from Afghanistan, in 2007, the Canadian Armed Forces adopted the Soldier On program. And it was really a natural extension of what Dr. Gutmann was doing back in Stoke Mandeville, using sport in recovery. And you relate our mission clearly, and it's provide resources and opportunities for sport and recreation. And now we've added creative activities to our list. And since inception, we've helped thousands of ill and injured members build confidence and an active lifestyle. I can personally attest to the power of sport in one recovery, not only from what I've seen and witnessing the life transformations through Soldier On and the inspiration that I am fortunate to see on a daily basis, but as a Canadian Armed Forces, retired Canadian Armed Forces member who has lived through life-threatening wounds during a suicide bomber attack in Afghanistan in 2004. I lost vision in my right eye, multiple shrapnel wounds to my body. From my experience living and working with those physical and mental health wounds, the road recovery, it's not really a road, it's more of a trail. It can be lonely, it can be tough to navigate, dark, desolate, and very, very daunting. After chasing a promising career in the military, what happens if it's suddenly taken away? In the sense that much what Lieutenant Colonel Staniowski can attest to with pro hockey players, and he spoke to it, that the parallels that he spoke to, when all you know and embrace is that team atmosphere, that working towards a common goal and a win, and suddenly you're removed and you can't play anymore. Where do you turn? So many unanswered questions and uncertainty. I felt it and thought nobody understood the challenges I was facing. Questions came to my mind like, will I be retained in the Canadian Forces? Will I be able to find a job if I'm retired? What will my social life be like? How will I deal with the triggers? I used sport early in my recovery, specifically hockey, and maybe too early because according to my doctors, it set me back physically, but from a mental point of view, it was so beneficial. Sometimes individuals need help navigating this trail. I was injured early in Canada's mission to Afghanistan. And while we collectively, Canadians, have come a long ways with the support provided, there's still a lot of work to do. Soldier On is just one of those many organizations available to help shine that light and help direct ill and injured members down the right path. And really, sport recreation is the vehicle that endorses acceptance, and it's okay to seek support. The aim of Soldier On is to contribute to the domains of well-being, specifically health, social integration, purpose, or other meaningful activity, life skills and preparedness, and culture and social environment. It has been proven to be instrumental. Sport has been proven to be instrumental. Not not only through those domains of well-being, but from a physical point of view, you get your heart rate up, it reduces stress, lower blood pressure, physical wellness, but it's also that sense of belonging and peer support, which Lieutenant Colonel Harding spoke about. It creates this healthy distraction to build confidence and motivation and live an active lifestyle, open other life's opportunities, and improve your family life. Sport's a beautiful vehicle that way. I do want to focus on that just a little bit, the power of sport and the sense of belonging. Injury, when you're injured, you're kind of left and sit on the sidelines just to recover, kind of take care of yourself. The Canadian Armed Forces still has a job to do. There's a mission to complete. Sports can help regain that sense of camaraderie and that esprit de corps. We find it with many soldier-on events. There's that connection that everybody served at one point in their life, and everybody has gone through a life-altering injury or illness. That connection is instantaneous, and it's magical to actually see it. And they find themselves leaning on each other and really knowing that the challenges, the nightmares, the dark places that they've been to are not unique. Other folks are feeling the same way, and it's okay to share and seek that support. And in that sense of belonging, it stretches past the peer support and that sense of belonging by others. It's Soldier On and other organizations are vehicles for Canadians to show their support through recovery and demonstrating that pure Canadian compassion which we all love, that service and sacrifice is not forgotten. Ill and injured members need to understand, and we're one of the vehicles that can help that, and through sport, that nobody needs to recover alone. And I think that's a very important power of sport.
If I can just ask one more question. A lot of the work of Soldier On and certainly the Invictus Games, I know that there is a concentration on kind of testing yourself. It's not about competition with others necessarily. It's more keeping track with yourself and pushing yourself, but then doing that as, with camaraderie. Can you just articulate a little bit about that sense? Because we heard a little bit about the playing of games, basketball, for instance, at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, where you build that relationship through working towards that common goal. But in this case, you're all, in some cases, working towards personal goals together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to be involved with numerous international competitions and activities and events with like-minded organizations across the country. From when Ed coached us down in Detroit when we played against the U.S. Wounded Warrior hockey team, to large-scale international competitions. It is that common goal and bringing it all together. For the past decade, Soldier On's hosted what we name as the Soldier On Allied Winter Sports Camp in Whistler, BC, where we've brought wounded, sick, ill members from Australia, the US, and UK to have a little taste of Canadian winter sports in beautiful Whistler, BC, from bobsled to sledge hockey to alpine skiing to Nordic, to name a few. It's incredible to see this bond that I spoke about before. It doesn't have a border. And reflecting back to our first camp, our intent was to have everybody train and learn their sports, because a lot of Australians have never seen snow before. So to put them in that environment, to train and get used to the sport. And then our idea was to break back into nations and have a friendly competition. Well, it was like day 3, and when we kind of pitched this plan to the participants, and everybody just stood up and said, no, we want to stay in our multinational groups. That bond, it spoke to that power of sports, connecting strangers, and that instant bond that they had. And it's been touched upon, we participate in the Warrior Games, which in 2019 had 5 international partners with all the US services down in Tampa Bay. and the Invictus Games, which is the most popular of the games, founded by the Duke of Sussex, inspired by the Warrior Games, has grown since the initial games in 2014 in London. It is incredible to watch that bond and esprit de corps and people leaning on each other through these kind of games. And I used an example in Sydney in 2018 games. There was helicopters flying around, and the Dutch were playing the UK in wheelchair tennis. The helicopters were flying around so much that it triggered one of the participants, and they couldn't carry on. Just trying to deal with that piece. But the first person to go over and put their arm around this other individual was a member of the Netherlands. The other team came over and put him and consoled him and made sure it was okay. And it was a beautiful moment. And like you said, it wasn't about sport at that time. It was about everybody coming together and helping each other, getting through a tough time. These challenges, a lot of folks, especially with mental health, have challenges with crowds, with being high profile. But when they get on that stage and they realize that, yeah, they're wearing their nation's flag again, there's other countries that are there that have gone through similar challenges. It makes them think that, the challenges from somebody in Edmonton, Alberta are no different than Sydney, Australia, or Manchester in the UK. It's incredible, and it also provides a platform for like-minded organizations like Soldier On to collaborate, support each other, learn best practices, with the end state of helping ill and injured members down the road. We fight together, we are wounded together as a result, and it's been beneficial to recover together.
Beautifully articulated, Colonel. Thanks, or Major. Thanks so much. I'm now just going to ask our final panelist, Lieutenant General Francis Allen, to answer a few questions before we get on to our general discussion. But as a reminder, please do fill in any questions you have at the sidebar on our YouTube page, and we'll hopefully be able to get to all of the questions. And with that, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce General Allen. She enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1983. After graduation from Queen's University in 1987 with an honors degree in statistics, Lieutenant General Allen has commanded 3 multiple levels throughout her career, including officer commanding in the National Systems Management Center in Ottawa, at the Aerospace and Telecommunications Engineering Support Squadron in Trenton, as well as the Canadian Forces Network Operations Center and the Canadian Forces Information Operations Group. God love those. It must be a wonderful alphabet of acronyms, put them all together. On promotion in 2014 to Brigadier General, she assumed the post of Director General Defense Security at the National Defense Headquarters, and has also served as Director General Cyberspace, Director General Information Management Operations at NDHQ, and Joint Force Cyber Component Commander. She was appointed Deputy Vice Chief of the Defense Staff after being promoted to Major General in June 2018. She was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant General in July of 2020 and has been appointed to serve as our military representative of Canada to the NATO Military Committee in Brussels. General, I think this is the first time we've ever met, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to host you on this. The Canadian delegation to NATO and the military representation at NATO is always a wonderful thing to be able to champion, and it's a pleasure to have you here. My first question is a little bit more geared towards the importance of organizations like the Canadian Armed Forces and NATO to supporting sports programs. So how do they support those programs themselves from the inside, as it were?
Well, thanks, Robert. And again, it just like my panelists, I'm awed to be in their company. I have to tell you for their accomplishments. And I like to think of myself as a similar sport aficionado, to be honest with you. In parallel to all the things that I've been able to do in my professional career, all the way through, the way that the Canadian Forces has always focused on sport as an integral part of the development of our men and women. You know, I have been involved in my sport of choice is volleyball. Obviously, as a very tall person, you get basketball or volleyball. I picked volleyball. Charlene picked basketball. You know, those are our choices. I've been playing volleyball and being part of the Canadian Forces volleyball program for forever and a day, pretty much since I joined as an athlete, right through till 2004 at the local, regional, national, and I played on our CISM team, and then migrated into sort of leadership roles within the sports program as a patron. And currently I sit as the one on the board of directors as one of the representatives from the Americas to the CISM, which is a Conseil International des Sports Militaires, which is a 140 nation military sports organization that organizes sport competition amongst military members. And so why does NATO and CISM and the Canadian Forces and 140 other nations care about sport? It is exactly for the reasons that everyone brought forward here. It's about, you know, creating amongst a military the discipline, the teamwork, the perseverance, the commitment, the building strength to work through failure, to come out the other side and win again. Those types of skills and that stick-to-itiveness that you need to be able to accomplish our real jobs in the military. And so you would, of course, want to encourage sport as part of that, as you build your military force. But then as you take a look, you know, strategically, all those same things that we talk about, that it builds internally, when we talk about trying to act as a catalyst for peace and for rebuilding in environments in which security has actually become, has actually been not present, and you're actually trying to rebuild an environment of security and understanding and community normalcy moving forward after conflict. Sport has an amazing capacity to do that as well. And this has been, you know, espoused and recognized by religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, international organizations like the United Nations. The IOC has partnered on all sorts of these sport, peace and sport type developments moving forward. CISM, as the organization that I'm part of, back 15 years ago, organized a sport and peace summit in Manitoba, Italy, and really invited the IOC, invited NATO, invited 22 countries, international sports organizations, and said, you know, we really believe there's a possibility about not just repairing, but preventing conflict and maintaining peace by creating understandings between people. The things that we talked about what it does for us as members of a team, if you can use sport as that lever to actually start to create understanding between people who may not have the opportunity to interact with each other on a normal basis, but create that with a rule set that everybody understands. If you all understand the rule of a sport, or at least all learn the rule of that sport, so that you know what your bounds are. If you focus on fair play and sportsmanship, which again is a set of respect and rules that you have to come through, it's really a super opportunity to use sport as a confidence building measure, either between militaries, but also between militaries and their populations, and the people who are in the environment where militaries are, because after conflict, there is certainly, that is not necessarily a bond that is very strong at that point in time. And so using sport as that type of an opportunity is really a very powerful thing.
So much, General. And just to follow up on that a little bit, to see if we can tease out any more real world strategic benefits that can come out of military sports programs. Did any pop into mind immediately, or?
Well, strategically, I guess if I were to look at it, I would take a look at some instances where these things have been done and what it has been trying to accomplish. So In CISM, we starting back in 2006 after the conflict in Yugoslavia, where there were the former republics of Yugoslavia after the war. They organized a futsal, which is it's sort of a form of soccer. I don't know if you know what futsal is as a sport, between the former republics, between the militaries of those former republics, to try to create normalcy after conflict in the population. And competition was hosted every year in one of the 6 republics. So at this point in time, then one of the 6 countries moving forward, to bring those service members together to create normalcy. And that has now starting its 3rd iteration of sport amongst what is still a largely peaceful, but still somewhat some tensions that exist in that part of the world that is slowly normalizing. The United States Southcom has done this back again in the early 2000s, sort of in the Central America between Panama and Nicaragua, and they did it with baseball. And they put in place baseball competitions, clinics, humanitarian, and they did this in each of the countries and then created opportunities for the people and the militaries to interact and create a normalcy between people and their militaries, and it's really these kinds of things, as the guys and gals on the panel will certainly identify. Sport pops up wherever it can, whether it's and a lot of the African UN missions, you'll see people playing football with not a football. It'll be clothes stuffed with things into the general shape of a ball, and people can just go out and try to be and have some normalcy back into their lives again in what can be conflict. And so what that does in creating social order and normalcy, I think, is something that we should all aspire to use sport for at a strategic level, tactically, to create a better strategic effect.
I love that. It brings right into the whole rules-based international order. Same thing. Rules-based sports, everybody can agree on. That's how you play nicely and well, and nobody gets hurt. Oh, that's terrific. Well, we've got a number of great questions from YouTube, and I'd like to pool a few of them together. We've got 2 on the Olympics, not surprisingly. I don't think any of you really touched on the Olympics other than the Paralympics, but just talking about the general idea of the Olympics helping to unify countries around the world. That's been great, but is there any other way that it can have a more prominent role in peacekeeping, which kind of trails off what you were talking about, General? And seeing as I'll just follow the second bit of this question, the 2020 Olympics had to be postponed because of the current health crisis. Do you think the pandemic will have a long-term effect on future international sports events? And is there much of an effect right now at SHAPE, for instance, or any other military sports events? To anybody? Put a lot on the table there. I'm sure we could find something. Colonel Harding.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak. I mentioned it earlier, but just even as a CISM coach right now, it's been 6 months. It's been a year since the World Games. So last year we had what's equivalent of military Olympics, where we bring in I think there was almost 9,000 athletes and staff. So we all come together and we do similar to the Olympics. We have different competitions, and since then, shortly thereafter, COVID happened, and we haven't actually been able to train at all. Not even personal training, because people have been either quarantined or gyms have been closed, or so. The COVID effect is affecting competitive sports. University CIS isn't, sports aren't running. Here at SHAPE, the International Basketball Tournament, for the first time in forever, has been canceled, which isn't as sad as other things that have been canceled, but personally it's pretty sad. So there is a lot of that's impacting athletes, and it's hard to maintain that same level of training, because you can run and you can lift weights, but if you're not actually playing the sport, you're losing out a lot on that competitiveness. So I really feel for the Olympians, because they've spent 4 years trying to get to this one pinnacle, and it's just been extended again. So yeah, I mean, The effects will eventually, crossing our fingers, eventually we'll have some kind of a vaccine and we can get back out there. But once we get back out there, it's going to take us another couple of months to get back into it. So it's going to be a little bit of a while still.
In general, you wanted to jump in, I think, or?
I think just the issue of international sport and Olympic sport and the role in COVID, I think they are recognizing that they've got to actually find new ways of continuing. The desire of the athletes is still there. The desire of those of us who get joy out of watching such, incredibly performed acts of sport. That is all there, and we've had our missteps, I think, that we've seen in professional sports as well, where we're trying to find our way to do things safely in the short term, and having a couple of missteps along the way and needing to sort of retrench ourselves back into something to take it forward again. I do think it is going to have an impact. I know in our international military sports organization, we have had to cancel events, pretty much all of the events in the rest of 2020 and up into 2021, even to the June timeframe. It's just so uncertain. But we've actually been trying to substitute virtual engagement for that. A lot of the engagement has been around virtual fitness, trying to keep that going. As Charlene says, there's no real equivalence to the competition portion of it, and the particularly the anything that requires the equipment and anything else that's part of that. But trying to move this into a virtual environment that still brings some competition, but is a little bit more individual centered, but keeps you in that mindset moving forward. It is going to be a rebuilding time, I think, before we can get back to that level of sport again, but I'm sure looking forward to it.
I think everybody is, for sure. I did want to jump to another question, which I find very interesting, is how can the use of sports as a diplomatic tool be better leveraged in the current multipolar climate, or the growing multipolar climate, with new emerging security risks and obviously new players becoming more insistent at the table, our friends in China, for instance. How might sports be used in a better way? How could we use sports to bridge that gap, as it has been able to do, certainly among allies? I'd be really interested to hear all of your ideas on that. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first if that's okay, and then I see Ed's got his hand up. And I think it's really about focusing back on using international venues that have internationally agreed upon sets of rules. Again, back probably to your point, Robert, on international rules-based order. To sport, there are international rules bases that provide order to sport, be it executed locally or at an international level. And when you can find opportunities where you create a common understanding and a common approach and a common respect for those rules, you start to create connections that you may find difficult to create in other elements of international rules bases that are out there. I've been to China and I've been to Russia as part of the international military sports organizations, and along the lines of the rules of sport and competition and fair play and everything else, we can find a common thing to gravitate towards, even if we don't necessarily, from a political perspective, see eye to eye on the way things are being approached by all of those same players.
Robert, if I could add to that, I'm reminded of the 1972 series between Russia and Canada, and then other series that happened since then. Being part of Team Canada in 1979, I can remember playing in Moscow, and we went from the rink to a reception in the Kremlin, and with the Premier of Russia hosting us, and the President, and all of the government of Russia right there with it. So I mean, it was, and I'm standing at a table with Major Tretjak, the goalie for the Russian team, and you know, interfacing with him through an interpreter. And my Russian isn't that good, and you know, having the opportunity. So that's right at the coalface, of course. But you can remember Canada was captivated by that series, and there's been other series since then. And all of the, you look at all of the international competitions that we've had, and again, what Jay is doing, you know, with Soldier On and Wounded Warrior across international boundaries, it opens a lot of things up. You're talking to princes and queens and presidents, and it has an impact, and there is opportunity there because you're in an arena that many of the other biases don't come into. It's about sports, and from that, you can, it at least gets you talking, I would offer.
Colonel Harding, Major Frayco.
I agree with everything that's being said, especially with Ed and the sport and the competition. And I've seen this at all the Invictus games, especially the Toronto games, which were in 2017. Is there's an extra piece of the competition is one piece of it, but there's also the discussions and the networking and everything else that goes behind the scenes, and you make a lot of good connections. And maybe some countries are a little bit further behind, and in my realm, it's using sport as recovery. We can help move that along and work collectively together to help ill and injured members across the globe.
A bit like track 2 diplomacy in some ways. It can be very helpful, I think. I would also just, Jay, if I can keep it on you, just asking how COVID has impacted Soldier On. How have you had to address you know, your goal to use sports to rehabilitate service members? Must be an extra challenge.
Absolutely, and it was a steep learning curve for everybody, not just us. We're fortunate now that we have expanded across the country into a local regional kind of framework, and being Canada and being so large, you know, COVID hotspots have popped up different areas. So like in Atlantic Canada right now, we're running our local regional events, so getting folks back out. But say here in Ottawa, not so much, sort of thing. So we are moving towards that. We have really embraced the virtual world. Invictus Games, the foundation has embraced it. So they're putting out these virtual international competitions where people can sign up for a rowing competition or a running competition or a cycling competition, and you know, you've got technology, and then they're racing each other. So trying to represent and replicate it, it's not the same as alluded to by the panelists, but it's close, and it's getting folks back into it. We also have our grant program, and we offset the cost of equipment so folks can still do their own thing and get out and become active. So it's a steep learning curve. We're trying to do what we can. We're coming out of this a little bit. We have our eyes on Invictus The Hague right now, and we're working towards Invictus in 2021, which was postponed from 2020. So hopefully we can get there. But yeah, we're doing whatever we can to get out there and keep active.
I like that. It sounds like personal training meets gaming a little bit.
Yeah.
So one last question for you all, and I think it's very interesting. It's a bit of a wagging finger. Where are we on this? Physical sports are the crux of military activities. And if that is the case, why does no concept of mental sports exist within training such as chess to sharpen logical skills and strategic abilities for all ranks? I'm sure most of you have seen that there are all sorts of mental dexterity games on your phones now. I haven't heard anything about this in the military. Any response from any of the panel?
Jay, I don't mind popping in. I've got to tell you, I don't know about that, but I think it sounds like an amazingly good idea. You know, even just as a way of keeping yourself, you know, sharp, and like the brain games, you know, all of those, you know, fighting off Alzheimer's, you know, as it was always our, I think 2 or 3 years ago when those first started to come out, sort of thing. I think it's a fantastic idea, actually, and yeah, I challenge us as a Canadian Armed Forces to think about that.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks.
I think it's the future that certainly they're all of our militaries, all of NATO and the alliances and coalitions that we're a part of. I mean, it's all going technical now. You've got space commands being set up, and certainly the general can speak to this more than anyone. But yeah, the way of the future is very much going to be tied directly into how our internet and all of the other electronics and that's going. The days of boots on the ground are slowly grinding down, I think.
And if I could just add, it is a different generation. So for those of us that have children, and I have teenagers, so it is a very technical world right now that we live in. And I mean, there's some of the stuff they say, I have no clue where they're going with it, but I'm sure they're right. But mental training is really important, and those that are doing like our national coaching program, and they're including a lot more and more mental training, and it's more for mental toughness so that you don't break down, but it's also just thinking outside the box and not just, doing as you're told, but really understanding why you're doing it and a little bit step further. So maybe chess is the answer. I'm not sure. I'm really not good at board games, but I do like puzzles. So yeah, but perhaps that's something I should get the ladies to start doing since we can't get into the gym.
Major, any last points?
Yeah, and this is an area that we're really focused on and moving within our strategy for the next 5 years is that I mentioned it before, the creative aspect of it, and I think it goes along kind of with that mental sport, expanding into music, into theater, into painting, woodworking, leather making, what you name it, moving into that, and the benefit and the recovery process of doing those sort of things. We know it's beneficial and we're embracing it. So we're running a pilot this year on those creative activities across the country, which can draw parallels to that mental chess game and everything else. Yeah.
Well, I gotta say, this is it's just such a pleasure to have you all come and speak and meet on this one subject. Sports is a glorious thing because it represents both the method of collaboration, or it gives evidence to it that helps that collaboration helps our peace be maintained by NATO and other multilateral organizations. But it is also a celebration of flourishing of what we can do with peace. So it's that wonderful circle where you've got both the way that we are providing the peace and the celebration of it. So all four of you are to be commended on everything you've been doing on promoting sports and that kind of collaboration. Because as I think we've all seen, the zero-sum idea where there is always a winner and always a loser is pretty much anathema to the entire post-World War II order, the rules-based international order, where we believe that we can all put something in and all get more out, as long as we all do it together. And NATO has been one of the greatest evidences of that in history. I think we should all be proud to be part of it. Every Canadian should be proud to be part of it. And tomorrow, I hope that everybody who's watching will take a moment, stand up, and observe a moment of remembrance for all those who sacrificed for what we enjoy today. And that includes sports, culture, all of our favorite things. So it's worth reminding ourselves that it doesn't just happen magically. It doesn't come for free. We've had to pay a price, and we all must make sure that we don't take it for granted. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you'll keep in touch, maintain an eye on what we're doing. We're constantly bringing new conversations to all Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. General, Colonel, Major, an absolute pleasure, and I hope you'll keep in touch, and we'll be publishing more on the importance of sport. Cheers, everyone.